Hello, everyone. Welcome as we are gathering for the next session of Turning Toward Grief. Let us know where you're zooming in from, what the weather is like. We always love to hear that. And just a hearty welcome to all of you. We are so grateful to have you here and to be welcoming Rosemerry Wahtola Trommer into our circle this week. So let us know where you're coming from. We'll give folks a few extra minutes of grace to join us here, and then we will be getting started. And I see my friend Heather is joining us from Manchester, Vermont, which is just 20 minutes away. And we have folks joining us from Canada, from all over the place. And someone, Amrita, is saying the file I sent was George Bilgier. If you scroll down, you'll see that Rosemary's poems are in week 2. We're just keeping everything in one Google Doc so that it's less confusing and less going between things. So just scroll down if you're on that Google Doc and you'll see the poems for Rosemary this week, though I imagine she will likely read um, some new ones and some different ones than the ones that I've chosen. All right, so let's just go ahead and get started. I'm sure folks will be joining us in the midst of time passing. And that's just fine. I am so glad to have all of you here with us. I'm so fluttery and excited and honored that Rosemerry Wahtola Trommer is joining us today. She has been a dear friend. I'm sure most of you already know who she is, but if you don't know who she is, you definitely should, and you will. And Rosemary is the author of several collections of poetry, most recently, All the Honey and The Unfolding, which I have right by me here, and all of which I recommend. Naked for Tea is another one. And when I say that these are books I go back to regularly over and over again, I'm not just being complimentary. I'm not just being polite here. That is absolutely true. I keep them by my desk. I keep them by my reading chair there in the back. You can see behind me. And they're just always in rotation because they are the kinds of poems, probably like George Bilgier's last week, where, you can read them and think, oh, wow, beautiful. And then you read them again, and something else is happening. And then you read them again in a different season of your life, and you realize something else entirely is happening. So there's a layered depth and complexity to Rosemary's poems that have taught me so much over the years of our friendship so far, and that I know will be useful to all of you. For those of you who don't know, Rosemary has a daily writing practice. She writes a poem a day and post that on her blog, 100 Falling Veils, which I subscribe to and read every day, and recommend that you do so too. And I also want to say, I've said this before in other venues, but Rosemary lost her son years ago, and watching her and reading her go through that grieving process through writing, through poetry, taking that in really helped me when I met my own sort of year of grief. I think that was the next year after you lost Finn, and really gave me an example and a mentor to follow through this maze and mystery of grief. So thank you, Rosemary. I didn't mean to do such a prolonged intro, but obviously my enthusiasm prevails. And so happy to have you here.
Thanks. Thank you, James. Oh, I mean, I love talking with you all the time. And looking in the chat bar and attendee list, I see so many people who I love and adore. Nice to see all of you. And people who I don't know yet, I'm grateful to be here with you.
Yeah. So I would love it if we could start with a poem. Any poem you want to read, just to bring us into the soul space here.
Well, maybe I'll start with this one then. I went through this morning and chose a few that are newer. Uh, and this is one that I wrote about coming together to
Mm.
show up for grief together. So it's called Those of Us Who Choose to Turn Toward Grief. Somehow we find each other. Though our gathering doesn't fix or change the loss, there is tenderness, even beauty in coming together. I have read in Switzerland, it's illegal to own just one guinea pig. It's considered animal abuse because they are social beings. We too are social beings. Perhaps we don't sniff and nudge and squeak and rumble strut, but we cradle, we hum, we hold. We whisper soft encouragement, light candles, offer tissues, hug. There are times when I deeply need to be alone with my grief. Even then, curled into myself, quiet in a dark room, even then I am held by the certainty I am not alone. What a gift we give to ourselves, to each other, when, in our grief, we enter the circle of those who grieve and meet each other with open hands and say, I see you, brother. I see you, sister. I know it isn't easy. Here I am.
Mm. Thank you for that. I can't think of a better first poem to begin with for this. What I just referred to in today's email to everyone as a circle. It does feel like this coming together. And I so love these are the layers that I was talking about in your poems, Rosemary, that, you have this fun fact about it's being illegal in Switzerland, was it?
In Switzerland.
In
And,
Switzerland.
it makes me feel so bad because I used to have a guinea pig when I was a little girl. I just had one, Julio, and poor Julio was alone, and I didn't know that it was painful for him to be alone. Um, yeah, so there, I mean, that is a strange thing. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's so funny. Just today, I did an interview with Alison Luterman, who was talking about how she seeks out the strange in her poems. I don't know that I could say that, but I think I will now. And yeah, because it is a little strange, isn't it, about that? And yet that beautiful metaphor for how do we need it? We need each. It is actually painful. It is painful to believe that we're all alone
Yeah.
in it.
And don't you think too that it's almost impossible to go through grief fully alone? I mean, you know, our circumstances may be such that we are alone at different seasons of life, but to just, you know, even to seek out the company of people who have written about grief, to seek out others who have journeyed through this, I feel like is completely necessary in order to, as you say in your poem, also to be alone when you need to be alone with grief, because we do still feel held, like you're saying, by this larger thing and by other people who have gone through it before us, who are going through it with us. So I think it's the beauty of this gathering that we are co creating here today and throughout these 4 weeks together, that we're coming together. We may not be seeing each other, but we know that we have all been through this at some point, and it's a great comfort. And I so appreciated that image in the poem of curling into myself, as you said, like that little guinea pig, perhaps, or just this protective posture when we need to be alone or when we need to feel alone while with other people. I think that's the beauty of true companionship, is that you can feel what you need to feel if other people are there who are able to support you and not try to fix it and not try to impose their needs or wants on you.
Yeah. I don't know how anyone would do it alone, James. I
Mm,
don't know. I do know that feeling, even this, the communion of people who grieve, right? To know that we aren't alone, that there is so much love available. And I know how incredibly important that was for me, especially in the first, you know, well, the first days, the first months, the first years after Finn died, my dad died. I feel like just the sense that I was being held, that there was, even if it's just by someone's thoughts, just and I remember sometimes it felt like too much, right? I'd be like, that's too much. I don't want all of that attention.
mm,
That is way too much attention. That is way too much love. Then I would imagine just one person stopping.
mm,
And I think, no, no, it was just enough. It was just enough. So whether that sense of being held is physically by somebody who's actually close to us, or just a energetic thought of, oh, here we are. We are in this together. I am carried by these other people who love me, but also just by these other people who are experiencing the same truly natural part of
mm,
our humanity. To know
yeah.
that there's it's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with feeling this awful. In
Mm,
fact, that is what it is. It is just that it is really that painful to
yeah.
lose someone. That's
Yeah.
not a problem.
Mm,
That's difficult, but it isn't a problem.
right.
And then to know, then yes, that we're supported then in that experience.
Yeah. How would you say the role of poetry and writing worked for you in those days of fresh, awful grief, and then as your own journey progressed? I mean, and I don't mean to speak of grief as something that ever ends, or that suddenly gets better or anything like that. But it does change. It does morph over time. And I think our relationship to it as artists and writers also changes too. So, how would you describe that for yourself?
I'm going to tell you in just one second, but I just saw it coming in the chat bar. All the poems that I share with you today, friends, I'm actually sending them all to James, and he will put them in that Google Doc. So
Mhm.
you'll have them all. So you don't have to go looking for them. They will come to you.
Yeah.
Um, so how did writing help, or what was the role of writing in the beginning? Uh, we'll say this. First of all, that I already had a strong writing practice. I'd already been writing a
Mm,
poem every day for many years before Finn died. So, and writing poems before that too, before it was a daily practice. So I did already have a practice of showing up, of sitting down every day and wondering what's here, what's here. And I say that because I feel like it was so important. I didn't know, it's not like I started a writing practice so that I knew that when something went wrong, I would have something there
right.
to support me. But what was clear then was just how much it was there to support me.
Mm,
And I also want to say that in the beginning, in those first 7 weeks after Finn died, I did not write. And that was
mm,
I, I wanted in that time to have the, the purest experience possible. And there is something about writing that solidifies things in a way, that frames things and keeps them framed. And I didn't want that. I just wanted to have that super porous, no attempt to make a boundary or a limit to name things. I just wanted to feel it,
mm,
feel it, feel it in the most, I said, pure way. Partly, though, I want to say I think that was possible because of the writing practice before it. That I
mm,
had that willingness or longing to show up and be curious and full of wonder. Because I think really that's what a writing practice is a willingness to sit down and be curious and show up and be curious. What's here, and to turn ourselves again and again toward what is true, knowing that what's true can be the exact opposite of what, like I have a poem in All the Honey. This starts out, he's dead, and then is he dead? No, he's alive forever. See, so the truths
mm,
can sometimes be a paradox. When I did finally start writing again, I I began with a very simple kind of stem, and if people have been in classes with me, this will sound very familiar. Uh, I just sit down and I write, "Today, grief is." And what was clear to me at the onset, then, as I started writing grief poems, was that there were really two kinds of grief poems. One is the kind where we're turning toward the person, or if it's a person, I mean, there's many kinds of grief.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm going to say now for the person who's gone, then the other kind of grief poem is about our relationship with grief itself. And I hadn't known that before, that there was the, the that would be two ways that it would come out in a writing practice. So I'm always curious now about how that works. Like that first poem that I just shared with you would be a poem that I shared that was about grief itself.
Mhm.
But lots of the poems are just writing about my son, about my father, about my friends who have died, just really bringing that back in and realizing how the writing of poems to these people, or for these people, or about these people helps to maintain our relationship with them. In fact, even grow the relationship with them. And I don't know that I knew that
Mhm.
that was a possibility. Uh, and now I know it is, that a relationship with someone who has died doesn't die, that that relationship actually can continue to grow, and that writing is one of the ways that we can do that. In fact, maybe, well, so over time, I wrote a lot of those poems. If you look in the unfolding or in all the honey, you'll see lots of, you could be like, oh, look, that poem probably began as today grief is, an
Mhm.
earthworm, a cottonwood shadow, a cup. Like if you look through there, you'd be like, oh, there it is. And it was a way to notice through metaphor. And what I love about metaphor, James, is that it it helps us step deeper into mystery right away. It helps us move past what we already think we know. And that's my favorite thing about writing, is writing past what I know. So the moment I could step into metaphor was already an invitation to step into mystery. So if I could say today grief is a tree. Well, I don't know, how is grief like a tree? Or today grief is a window. How is it like a window? I don't know. And then I just kind of wander into, what does windowness have to teach me about grief? And just that step into mystery already is part of what helped me not get stuck. I was saying how
Mhm.
sometimes writing can solidify things, but I feel like through, it's play, really. Today
Right.
grief is a window. How is it a window? I wonder. This allows for this kind of expansiveness to happen instead of a shutting down to happen. Also, we can get so stuck in our stories about how things are, especially around grief. And what I found was that by writing and changing the metaphors again and again and again, it helped me not be stuck. It helped me to stay more
Mhm.
open to, oh, look how much it changes. Look how much
Yeah.
I'm changing. So that's been really important, is just how writing has allowed it to evolve and allowed me
Right.
to evolve my understanding of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I so appreciate what you're saying about not solidifying perhaps the events of, the loss, whatever that may be, or whoever that may have included, but also not solidifying grief itself and allowing it to morph and change. And, by reaching into these different metaphors, I think that's a beautiful exercise, especially for anyone who is ready to explore grief, but to do so in a way that's not attached, because we do get very caught up in not just in how it is, but how it should be, or how it is supposed to look, or how we're supposed to grieve, right?
Oh, yeah. And it's just so
Um,
different for
mhm.
everyone. And it's so different for even one person, from moment to moment to moment to moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1 hour. I mean, you can live a whole lifetime of emotion in a single hour when you're in fresh grief, especially. Yeah, I asked that in part because my own experience was that I sort of wish I had known or remembered that you took that 7-week hiatus, because I think that is very smart. but also very brave because it can be really tempting to have some sort of buffer between yourself and the pain, which I think writing can be sometimes. I mean, anything can be a sort of distraction, a pleasant distraction, even. But I remember writing in my own fresh grief, which, very different from yours. But I just felt really angry and frustrated because anything I wrote felt like it was barely like brushing across the surface. Like it could not possibly capture, the life of my mother, the life of my grandmothers, the life of my father. And that just led to more frustration, feelings of failure. Oh my God, maybe I'm not a poet anymore. All these crazy thoughts that you might have in the midst of this. I mean, luckily those were short-lived, but I think for someone who maybe did not have as established a writing practice as you're saying, or, certainly for myself, I also have a daily practice. Like trying to keep that up may not be the best medicine
Yeah, maybe
at
not.
that time. Yeah. And I think any time where, because I hear from a lot of people who want to write about their grief, whether it's, memoir, whether it's poetry, and feel really called to do that, and at the same time are maybe not ready or, not ready to wade into those waters and essentially relive what you went through at that time. And I know that I've talked with other people about my new book, Turning Toward Grief, and how, I had this contract for the book. I had a due date for the book, but I could not make myself re enter the space of the book. Like a lot of it was already done, but it was sort of like a half finished building that I needed to step back into and like finish up and polish up. And there was some part of me that really resisted like polishing the grief or, shaping it for others to take in. And yet after I would do that work, I felt this incredible sense of purpose that I was doing something that really wanted to be done. But there was this sort of, I want to describe it as a ball of resistance or some sort of blockage to doing that work. So I don't know if you encountered any of that because you've published, now I would say, All the Honey and the Unfolding are both very much about grief, but they're also both very much about playfulness and joy. And so those are, again, those layers that I see at play in your poems.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of thoughts. Um, I love that you talk about what it was like and that kind of that frustration, and I'm not really getting it. This isn't it. Um, I have been doing a lot of in-person programs at in my local library for people who are grieving, and I realize that especially for people who don't think of themselves as poets, but then they come into one thing, and it's almost like you try to put all of it into one poem,
Hmm.
which is not going to happen, right? Like I just want
Yeah.
to promise you that you won't capture everything in one poem. I mean, how many I've written a couple of books, and plus how many hundreds and hundreds more that are on my blog but not in books, and I still haven't touched it, right? Like I still haven't gotten it right. I haven't told the whole
Hmm.
story yet. So the
Mm.
first thing I just want to say, especially to anybody who's here, is you aren't going to get it all in one poem or two or 50 or 100. You know, that it's going to keep changing and you will keep changing. And then writing becomes a way to continually be curious about the evolution. But we won't ever, we are never going to capture it in a poem, ever. Certainly not in one.
Right.
Take
Or
so
in
we
one
just
book.
or not even in one book. Yeah, so
Yeah.
just take that pressure off. Like, whew, not even gonna try. Not even gonna try.
Hmm.
And then oh, you said something else that I wanted to respond to about. Oh shoot, James. Uh,
That's okay. Well, I was going to ask, I mean, did you feel some of that pressure or frustration to try to capture it, or had you been
oh,
writing
right,
for
the
so
ball of
long?
resistance. This is it.
Yes, yeah.
The ball of resistance.
Which a resistance ball is also a thing. That's
Which
not
is
what I'm
all a
talking
different
about.
thing. Right. Okay, so I actually don't think this is totally what you're saying, but I'm going to I'm gonna swim into this.
Yeah.
I remember there was a while there, a long while, where the only poems I could write were about grief. That was it. It was so
Mm,
present and so everything that it was almost, I literally could not sit down and write something that wasn't about loss. And I mean, maybe it was about the beauty of loss. I mean, it could have been positive, but it was going to touch on loss somehow. There was no way to write a poem that wasn't infused with it. And then I remember the first time that another poem came out that didn't touch on loss, and it almost felt like a betrayal. Like, oh
mm,
no, is this a problem that I'm not writing about loss now? It was just interesting to watch that come up.
yeah.
There's another part of me that's able to meet that part and say, oh, sweetheart, right? Of course, you're scared, this has been this has become an identity. And there's more to life
Mm,
than this. So I remember just bringing so much tenderness to that moment of feeling like I was betraying the loss by writing about something that wasn't loss, allowing that to come into. And now it's interesting to notice, I'm over 4 years into it now, how the grief poems come and they go and and it's interesting to me also, by the way, that I'll write a poem that has nothing to do with grief, but people assume it does.
mm,
They'll
right.
bring their own perception into it, and I'm like, oh, that, I don't correct them. Half of the poem is the reader, but it's just interesting to me, this there's a fluidity now around writing around grief or writing around what it is to be alive, which feels so healthy to me, James.
Mm,
The ability for us to turn toward what is most difficult, and also the ability to turn toward what else is here.
right.
And how poetry really does allow us to do both of these things, about to feel it and to grow out of it. Um, Both.
Yeah.
So I'm just very aware of that. So that little resistance piece, um, I don't know that I feel it exactly. I think that maybe because I didn't have a book that I had to re-enter that way,
Mm,
that kind of said go back into grief now, even though that wasn't where I was actually at. Um, it would take an awful lot of energy to go back in
yeah.
if it wasn't what was rising up, I think.
Yeah.
And then I don't doubt that, of course, you had some kind of, oh, like relief, because when we do turn toward it and just meet it, but of course, if it's not showing up, why would I want to turn toward that? It's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, I know. The book is called Turning Toward Grief. I didn't want to turn toward my grief. I
How
really didn't want to
real,
re-enter it.
right? How
And
real.
yet, like you're saying, when I did agree to meet it again, I did find a different relationship with it. I did create a different relationship. I think the harder part was, you know, a lot of times when you're a poet, you already have these poems and maybe they need some tinkering or polishing, but you've done the work on them and then you put them in a book and that is the book. This book, of course, I wanted to challenge myself more. And so and by the way, I did not expect to be talking about my own book. I'm not trying to, take over the conversation, but it's so alive for me, that resistance to not so much re-entering the poems, but having to re-enter the prose that was describing what happened, what was going on behind the poem. And that was the really hard part because I realized I had to relive that in order to convey that and describe that for readers. And so I think that was the resistance. But there was just I'm struck by what you're saying too, Rosemary. I think you have also developed a very solid practice of self-compassion and gentleness with yourself over the years that has allowed you to meet grief in all of these ways, but also to keep showing up for grief and to keep showing up to the page. In some ways, there is not as much difference because grief can be a hard thing to show up for, very uncertain and mysterious, and creative practice can be very hard and mysterious to show up for. There's a lot of fear behind just meeting a blank page and being curious about what is there. So I think that was a lot of it for me, that the poems were already written, but there was this blank space, this blank page that I needed to kind of fill in the parts, and meeting that, like the combination of meeting the blank page and meeting the blankness and mystery of grief was almost too much in
Yeah.
some days. But the self-compassion piece is the thing that saved me, because my therapist, I brought this to her, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if this book is going to get done. And she said, well, it's not like you have to sit and work on it for 8 hours a day, or even 2 hours, or even 1 hour. You can re-enter it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, set a timer, and then you don't have to think about it again. And that little piecemeal meeting of the grief, both on the page and in real life, then was really key for me. And bookending that with, a cup of tea, or a talk with a friend, or a walk, or something that kind of got me out of the grief again, was really useful. So I guess I'm sharing that just if that's useful to anyone else. And I think a lot of Rosemary's gentleness and self-compassion, noticing how she handled that, how she met her grief, really seeped into my practice as well. So thank you for that too.
Yeah. Well, I think, this is I love this thing, just do it. Just give yourself a little time. Just know that you can go in for a short time and this, you have this escape hatch you can get through. Um, Other thing that's interesting to me too is just hearing you talk about it, not just the poem, but this other act then of witnessing the self. And I have a poem about
Mm,
that, around grief
perfect.
especially. So what is, let me see if I can find it. Um, all right, so this is a poem called On the Eve of His 21st Birthday. So I wrote this just oh, I guess just in September. And and by the way, I also I probably went beyond, but whatever. When I send you all these poems, I also wrote like writing invitations for all the poems. So there's little writing invitations for all of
Perfect.
you that goes with these poems. But the this one, I guess the reason I'm thinking of it now, James, is because of you talking about kind of what went on around the writing of the poem. And so this is a poem in which I stepped aside from the I and imagined I was a narrator watching me meet this moment, in which I was looking at a photograph of Finn, um, the night before what would have been his 21st birthday. There is a joy that chases sadness and sometimes overtakes it, as if the two are racing down a hill, their shadows sometimes merging. And this is how a woman looking at a photo of her son when he was still alive, his face radiant with elation, might find herself not knowing if her tears are made of gratefulness or sorrow, two parallel emotions that sometimes twine inside us. Nor does it matter to her. Gratefulness, sorrow, it seems right she should weep either way. Both feelings are fashioned from love. She is here for all of it. The salt tastes just the same.
Mm. I love that, she is here for all of it. And what was the line about fashioned of love?
Both feelings are fashioned from love. Gratefulness,
Yeah.
sorrow, it seems right she should weep either way.
Hmm. Yeah, both feelings are fashioned. Yeah. Wow. Mm. Yeah, just so beautiful. And what struck me about this poem, and especially with the context of what you just shared about the two kinds of grief poems, is that you managed to combine them in this one.
Yeah, a little bit. A little bit.
Yeah.
The image that I was looking at, in fact, was Finn and a friend of his literally racing down a hill, uh, the hill of our driveway here, and they were like their faces were like, like like they were in just this absolute glee. And there's no way to
Mm,
look at the photograph and not feel that super charge of elation.
right.
And so there's that, and of course the other layer of just the grief that it's gone, that he's gone, and here he's gone, and here, and he's physically gone. So there's those competing emotions that are happening just looking at this photograph. And I think, when I've often written poems about the photos themselves, just going into the photo and writing about what was happening in the photo. But in this one, I was I turned it around just a little bit and wrote about the observation of like there's so many layers. Like it's me looking at the photo and what's happening in the photo, and just letting those two boys in that picture be the sorrow and the and the elation, and how their shadows literally were in the picture merging. Um,
Mm.
so that there's that. How is it that they're the same but they're separate and racing each other, and how they do that bizarre alchemical
Yeah.
connection. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the great mysteries that sorrow, gratefulness, grief, joy can come so intertwined. And, Rosemary and I do a lot of programs together, and I feel like we always talk about that. Because I think that's when poems feel the most alive and authentic to me, is when they're interwoven like that, that they're not monolithic, or they're not just trying to be one thing, which I think, I can be guilty of trying to do, like, oh, it can only be one thing or one moment in this poem. Whereas in this poem, in the poem you read earlier, there's a moment of levity, lightness, playfulness, and then, there's grief, and then there's this other layer in this one of, distance. And, it's like the me, looking at the photo, remembering what's happening in the photo. And I'm so glad you read this one and shared about it, because last week we had one of George Bilgier's poems that was basically written from a photo of his mother hanging out laundry. And just there's this complexity to looking at a photo of someone who's no longer here, and what you see within that photo, and the way the body can remember into the photo. It's so fascinating to me, and it's what made actual physical photos, for me anyway, so important. After losing my mom and both of my parents and my grandmothers, I really valued those physical objects. I mean, yes, the digital as well, and you can carry those anywhere, but I really loved having something to hold in my hand.
Yeah. Maybe I'll read this other poem that I wrote just this week, James, about it. This is one where I really am thinking about him and who he was. And I feel like it's a little part of the reason I wanted to bring it in today is because it really touches on a place where he and I didn't connect, where it was really hard
Mm.
for us to connect. And those can be harder poems to write, at least for me. I'm sure everybody's different. But for me to really be like, oh yeah, this was a difficult thing. And um, so I thought I'd share one where it's kind of wrestling with and making peace with him at the same time. Dear Finn, on the way home from the protest, it occurred to me you likely would have stood quietly on the corner of Oak and Colorado with a sign that said, I stand with the president. It makes me grateful we were able to talk about such things when you were here, both of us loving our country in such different ways. I'm sure you somehow know they flew the American flag over the Capitol building in D.C. for you, a gift from someone we never met. They sent us that flag. It flew over the school on the day you didn't graduate. I sat in the school parking lot that day and watched the breeze lift its corners, giving life to the flag. And somehow, giving life to you, too. Every time I see the American flag, I say hello to you, especially the flag at the bottom of our drive. I know you don't hear me when I greet you, but somehow I know you do. Like the way I don't hear the sun, its wavelengths measured in hundreds of miles. Just because I can't comprehend the sound doesn't mean the sound isn't there. So I send my small yawp into the air and trust our mutual love. So I send my small yawp into the air and trust our mutual love for our country. Still brings us together somehow. Me in person, you in the wind that catches this hello from my lips and carries it beyond what is here. What is here? The chance to remember how deeply we can love those who are so different from us. The chance to remember how unity can look like disagreement. The chance to remember what is here is sometimes like peace, what doesn't seem to be here.
Ah, so beautiful, Rosemary. Thank you for sharing that. Mm. Have you read that one out loud
No,
before?
might be a while before I try that again.
Oh no, it's beautiful. I mean, you give us all permission to feel into our own poems more deeply and to feel into there, there's a lot of deep truth in this poem. And I remember reading this and just thinking, I would really have struggled with that, being, loving our country so differently. And that being your son, that being this deep love between you, but one big area in which you disagreed. But it allows you to, I can imagine, by embracing him and his difference from you, that's still existing, right? Somehow in that flag and that symbol that you're seeing in those signs. By doing that, you're also able to more easily embrace others and find that piece of disagreement and not just reject someone because you couldn't you wouldn't have wanted to reject him and you wouldn't want to reject him now. So um yeah, I'm again taken by the complexity of this poem, like there's a lot of layers here and a lot of emotion behind it. And I think it's a really hard thing to write a poem like this, not just because it's dealing with the fraught political landscape that we live in now, but also because of what you're saying, like this mysterious communication that is still alive with the people we've lost and the ways that we choose to communicate them with them or find them in the actual world still with us. And we all have these stories of like for me, when I see a barred owl outside, like I just think mother. I just know my mother is nearby. But we all have these seemingly strange signs and ways of connecting. But it's really hard to describe that in a way that captures it as well as this piece does.
You know, it was interesting when I had a woman wrote me and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry you and your son were so different," or something like that. And I wrote her back and I said, "Oh, no, I was so glad. I was so grateful that we were so different. I mean, that doesn't mean it was hard. It was hard. But I was also, by the way, the different one in my family, where, everybody else in my family, my mom, dad, brother, they're all super conservative. So I knew what it was like for him to be the one person who
Mm,
wasn't the same in this family. So I had a lot of empathy for that position and also so much gratefulness for it. And I do feel like this is the way, that the ways that we struggled with the people who we loved and the truth of how much we love them, letting those two things come together.
yes.
You know, how that continues to allow me to bring him into the world in a meaningful way, right?
Yes. Right.
He w- I like to think that his sign wouldn't said have said I'm for Trump, but I think out of loyalty, he and a sense of devotion to country and structure, he would have said I stand with the president because he's the president. Like that's how I think he would
Mm,
have been. But I don't know these things, and often I don't like to go into those projections because sometimes they're very painful to imagine this is how it would be because it isn't like that. But I think what was important to me in this particular poem was to explore then how did the relationship that I had with him then, how has that willingness and ability to love each other through that tension helped me now? How does it continue to serve me now? So it's more about that than
mm.
imagining him on the corner per se, but really about what is the legacy of that relationship and how does it continue to serve me now?
Yeah, legacy seems like a great word for what this poem is achieving. And and I just, I think it is a means to exploring something deeper. So it's not just about seeing Finn alive again on that corner. It is about, I mean, it's about a lot. I feel like I could go on and on about the poem. And I'm so glad you chose to read this one because I think it encourages all of us to wade into those deeper, rougher waters because, and I'm sure you and I talk about this a lot too, Rosemary, that good poetry, good writing is about collision. It's about paradox, as you often say. It's about juxtaposition. And so, the first few lines of your poem, you're talking about how he would have stood on that corner with a sign that says, I stand with the president. And then you say, I'm so grateful, and then go into how you're grateful for the differences and for the appreciation and embrace that you have of that. And so that's that juxtaposition again, that it's, total disagreement. And yet I'm so grateful. And I just feel like, gosh, if, it's a tall, impossible order in some ways, but if more and more of us could get to that place of, I appreciate our differences and the different ways that we love our country, and just have that empathy that you're bringing forth, knowing that you were the different one, you were the sort of standout in your family, and so you know how it felt for him.
Yeah. I want to say too that just how do we do that in our writing, right? I feel like this poem, some of the easiest poems for me to write, easy. I guess I don't really mean, one of the easiest ways to enter a poem is to do it as a letter. And that this is one
Yeah.
of the main ways, this is easy. This is a effective way to stay in relationship with the person who's gone, right? Is just to
Yeah.
write them a letter. And I remember doing a class with someone who's like, I cannot do that. It was way too difficult for them, which I want to honor that if it is too difficult to feel like you're having that kind of a communication, um, right, then don't. Just knowing that what's right for me may not be right for you. And I honor that completely, that we're just all in such different places and we all meet it so differently and all of us have such different griefs. But the chance then to write a letter to someone, just tell them what's going on in the day. This is what happened today. Your dad and your sister and I went to a protest. This is what we did, and then just bringing in what we most love about them, what's most our favorite parts about them, what would they most want to know. And, I was grateful for the chance to struggle a little bit in this poem. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's hard. That was a hard part of our relationship and it grew me. And it's continuing to grow me. So doing it in that letter format, I think is just in terms of writing. How do we start writing about this? Write a letter.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think you've given us some great examples. Writing a letter is one entry, one more accessible entry into this, but also, I think sometimes writing in that third person from a distance can be really helpful too. And I've seen other writers, Jack Gilbert comes to mind, who have done this in the midst of their own grief, um, writing about that relationship in a more distant third person way, I think allows us to have some insights that we wouldn't necessarily glean from just describing exactly what happened, especially if we're not ready for the intimate contact of a letter.
Yeah.
Um,
I noticed a question from Nicole Silva. She says, "Did you
mhm.
write that in one sitting?" Um, no, I almost always do, but this one, no. I started it at this grief group that I was teaching up in Telluride, and then walked away from it. Partly because I just didn't have time to finish it that night, and I wanted to write a poem for my husband for our anniversary. So I changed ship. I jumped ship and wrote an anniversary poem and saved this one then and wrote it the rest of it the next day. So it was actually a two-sitting poem. But I would also say that that's unusual for me, that I typically write them in a single sitting. But let's be honest, friends, a single sitting could be hours. Like I do write a poem every day, but I write at the end of the day, and that way I can give myself as much time as I'm able to stay awake, is how long
Yeah.
I have to write that poem. And sometimes this poem took a long time. It did. And also just having this kind of fascination in this poem with the sun. How are there things that are here that we cannot perceive? Science tells us that it is present, but because of who we are, we can't access that presence, right? The fact that the sun is making sound that we can't hear, that's
Yeah.
fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Not you know, I totally hear that homophone with the sun and my son,
Right.
and how is my son here in ways that I don't hear, but that doesn't mean he isn't here somehow, right? So I really liked that metaphor, and that took a little bit of time to find that little piece to see how does that fit in here. Um,
Hmm.
I did some digging. I think I did a Google search for what sounds or am I unable to hear. I think that was how I started, with a
Mm.
search like that. And then when it came up with this one with the sun, it was like, oh, all right then,
Yeah, you
thank
couldn't
you.
make that up. I love that. Well, I mean, on this sort of theme, there's a question in the Q&A from someone. Often grief can be so disorienting, or grief can be about so many circumstances at once. What practices help orient you when you're asking what's here?
Oh,
Um,
that's such a beautiful question.
yeah.
And I just want to honor that that's exactly right. Like there can be so many things at stake at once. So once again, I just for myself when that's happening, I tell myself, sweetheart, you just have to do one at a
Mm,
time. Just don't you don't have to take it all on right now. Just choose one. Knowing that you can choose another one tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. So that's first of all, that's what I would say. And typically it's just I think what is rising up most, what it's usually just which is the noisiest, pick me.
mhm.
Um, that's not always true though. Sometimes the noisiest one is the hardest one to write about. It's the one that has the least amount of clarity, and that doesn't mean that, whew, boy, let's not say that you need any clarity to start. In fact, I think having zero clarity to start is maybe the best starting place for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I just mean it's too hot to touch. And there's a certain ripeness that has not happened yet. I'm not ready to meet it yet. So sometimes the thing that's the loudest is not the thing that I write about. I choose the thing beneath it, or maybe a few things beneath it.
Hmm.
The example that I think of often around this is the night my mom went into the hospital, and she's fine. But I wrote a poem about a rubber spatula because I just couldn't touch mom going
Yeah.
into the hospital. It was way too scary and hard to meet. And I was like, nope, not right now. I mean, after the fact, days later, plenty of mom in the hospital poems. But that particular night, I was like, how, let me turn towards something else that's here. with wonder and
Hmm.
show up in that way and let that piece cool down just a little bit before I touch it.
Yeah. Well, and I think this goes to Vidu's question, just asking about if there are other energetic somatic practices along with a daily creative practice that have helped you show up with so much generosity, authenticity, vulnerability in public spaces, and offer the healing medicine of your poetry. I was just going to say, in line with the spatula, that, oftentimes it's hard for me to discern my emotions and I can get very disembodied very easily. So I really, part of my, just mindfulness practice as well as writing practice has to be to start with what's here. So, three things that I notice, physical things that I notice in the room or outside of the room, or counting colors, or going into the senses, opening up the senses, what calls to me. Somehow it's like outside of myself, but it's still physical and I'm taking it in. So it brings me back into my body where I can sort of identify some of those different layers. And the metaphor that I use to, and maybe this goes along with some of those other energy body practices, is like, I think it's really hard to come at something that is very hot to touch head on. And so I've noticed where I live here in Vermont, people often don't use their front doors. So they come through the side door, through the mudroom, and then up into the house. And that's sort of how I have to approach some of those hard things. And maybe the first part of the writing sort of falls away. Maybe it's not as important. Or maybe that is part of the journey of going through the mudroom to get to the difficult stuff. So I don't know if that's helpful, but those are just a few things that popped up. Did you have any other ideas about the somatic
Yeah.
energy practices?
I think I don't, and I almost understand that that means outside of a writing practice. Although I
Hmm.
really love, James, what you're saying about how, and this is, I'm so interested in this constantly right now, is how do we bring the body in? How do I bring the body into the writing practice? Because when I do, it shifts everything. It shifts everything about what the the practice itself. It shifts everything about the poem that shows up. I'm just so grateful. I can't imagine how many years I wrote without remembering I had a body.
Hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, body, for showing up. Um, uh, in terms of other things that just help us stay into our bodies, I mean, walking has been the biggest thing for me. Going outside and walking, excuse me, are probably just the simplest grounding practices I have for staying present and being able to show up at all. I have to do it pretty much every day. When I don't do it, I feel it. So just walking, and if I can't walk, then just going and sitting on the porch or, wandering the yard for a little bit, but just making sure that I get outside and there's nothing as helpful as that for me.
Hmm.
It puts things in perspective. It literally wakes me up no matter what the weather.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say the poem that I chose of Rosemary's Sitting on the Porch at Night is a good example of that, just really focusing on those physical things. I felt my whole body coming alive when I read that poem, and so that's one of the reasons I wanted to share it with you all. So I think this is the point where we will I was going to say transition into some writing. We'll do a little transference here. And thank you so much for sharing so generously about your process and how things are for you, Rosemary. Um, I wanna I wanna open it up to you. I don't know if you have poems, prompts that you're feeling really called to share, but the one that I was gonna have us read and then work from is with astonishing tenderness.
Oh, good. That'd be fun.
So if you wouldn't mind reading that for us, and then we'll
Oh,
do a
yeah,
little
that'd be fun.
writing from that.
Let me find it, friend.
Okay.
I think I should find it right away here. There it is. So this is from the new book. With astonishing tenderness. When, in the middle of the night, you wake with the certainty you've done it all wrong. When you wake and see clearly all the places you've failed, in that moment, when dreams will not return, this is the chance for your softest voice, the one you reserve for those you love most, to say to you quietly, "Oh, sweetheart, this is not yet the end of the story." Sleep will not come, but somehow, in that wide awake moment, there is peace, the kind that does not need everything to be right before it arrives. The peace that comes from not fighting what is real. The peace that rises in the dark on its sure, dark wings and flies true with no moon, no stars.
Yeah. Part of the reason I wanted to share this one is that line sort of midway in the poem. This is not yet the end of the story has been so important to me. I think I even stole it from one of my poems or a version of it because it's so powerful to say to yourself when you're in the midst of despair, grief for what's going on in the outer world, grief for what's going on within you. This is not yet the end of the story. This is not monolithic. This is not the way it will always be. And as humans, I think there's some programming, there's some part of us that wants to believe because we feel something, it's just always going to be this way. It's never going to change. And that brings up panic. That, of course, that brings up anxiety. And so I appreciate the sort of good news of that truth. And also, as I mentioned before, the deep self-compassion that is present in this poem, the sweet self-talk, the difficult truth about how peace really comes from not fighting what is real, from being present to what's here. So, um, Rosemary, feel free to add to this, but I think what I would invite folks to do is to just meditate on that phrase that's at the heart of the poem. This is not yet the end of the story. And I always say, feel free to write toward whatever comes to you. Go your own way. If another poem or another piece is tugging at you, please follow that. But in this one, if you want to focus on this as your sort of point of meditation for the writing, you might just write a set of instructions for yourself about what to do in those moments when you end up ruminating, when you wake up in the middle of the night, believing you could have done more, thinking that you have failed somehow, thinking that you're not doing grief right, that you're not doing life right. How can you offer that self compassion, that comfort to yourself?
The only thing I'd add, and somebody asked if I'd read it again. I don't know how you feel about that,
That's
but
a good idea. Yeah.
um, the thing I would add is if this is one of my favorite invitations to myself, right? Is that if you can say anything that you think is true, then try to write the opposite and see if it's also perhaps true, right? This is the end of the story. Is it the end of the story? No, this isn't the end of this story. How is that
Mm.
also true? You know, just something to play with. You know, if you, especially if you're writing yourself instructions, you know, you should be quiet. Is that true? You should yell. Is that also true? Right. So just to play around, right, with
Mhm.
whatever shows up, wonder into its opposite also, and see what happens in that tug. Here's the
Mm.
poem again then. With astonishing tenderness, when in the middle of the night you wake with the certainty you've done it all wrong. When you wake and see clearly all the places you've failed, in that moment, when dreams will not return, this is the chance for your softest voice, the one you reserve for those you love most, to say to you quietly, "Oh, sweetheart, this is not yet the end of the story." sleep will not come. But somehow, in that wide awake moment, there is peace, the kind that does not need everything to be right before it arrives, the peace that comes from not fighting what is real, the peace that rises in the dark on its sure, dark wings and flies true with no moon, no stars.
All right, friends. Well, let's follow the prompt that I gave and that Rosemary added to, especially important that idea of, just pushing against any authority within us that tries to tell us it's this way or that way. Um, and the other thing I want to say, just in listening to this poem, is really give yourself permission to um, follow the sounds, follow the music of the language. Don't worry if it makes sense or if that's really true or that's not true. Just follow the truth and the music of the language and see what comes for you. So we'll write for about 15 minutes and then come back together, say a little goodbye. I think I'm gonna read a poem that I wrote earlier in preparation for this session, and maybe Rosemary will read us one more on the way out. Okay. Happy writing, everyone. I'll put this up on the screen, at least the invitation anyway. Right, friends. So take another moment or so to finish up writing, and then we'll come back together in about a minute. All right. So before we head out, I just want to say a few things. So, first of all, Rosemary and I are going to be hosting our usual Stubborn Praise meeting. If any of you would like to join us, we keep that program really affordable. So, pretty much anyone can join who wants to join. It's very reasonably priced. And it's a couple of hours of us essentially having a conversation in poetry. And so, our theme this December will be holding the light, parentheses, and the dark. Especially, it'll be right around the solstice time. So there's a link to that. I'll send that out in the aftercare email as well. And thank you, Jen. Thanks for saying it's always great. So I want to share a poem that I wrote in anticipation of today with all of you. It came and I was really swept into the poem, came very quickly as poems don't always do. And so hopefully there's just something in this for you to carry with you throughout the rest of the week. And maybe the prompt is like we were just talking about earlier, thinking about those ways that we sometimes try to avoid or sidestep grief and allowing ourselves to just feel the full, pure experience as Rosemary was describing it. So, this is my poem called My Grief. I tried so many ways to sidestep grief, avoid the ambush at the grocery store, or driving through a tunnel of orange leaves still clinging to maples, now and then twirling down like a spent wish to rest on my windshield. But over and over came the lesson, rough blessing I could not deny. The trick was to surrender. Make space in the house as I would for a guest, clearing shelves, leaving room in the closet for whatever sorrow chose to hang there. Giving in, getting grace, passing it on. I learned to love the hook of someone's arm pulling me closer, and the only helpful words. I don't know what to say. I learned to answer the door, even when I knew who was waiting on the other side. And then I made my grief a key.
Wow, that's a brave poem. Well, it's not a brave, it's a brave way to live.
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you,
Well, you have
James.
modeled that. Thank
Rough blessing indeed.
you.
All right. I did put in the chat bar a document that has all those poems, but I think James is going to put them into that handout or the Google Doc for you also. But I did also put in the bottom. This is what I did instead of writing today. I made the list I was supposed to make for you of upcoming events. So I'll send it all to you too, James. But I did just put it in the chat bar up above. Um, so this is called The Holding, and I guess it's like a sister poem for yours. The way the shore holds the pond, that is how I want to hold the pain in my heart, honoring how vital it is, how it is home to things with hard shells and sharp claws, and also to beings with gossamer wings. To drain it would be to lose my aliveness, to become barren, cracked, dry. I can't say I love the spider like skaters that streak across the top, nor the thick gray muck that lines the bottom. But I love the green rushes that rim the edges, the red stem willows, the wild iris. It is no easy thing to hold pain. But I look how vibrant the pond shore is. This, this alive, is how I want to live.
Mm, mm, so true. Well, thank you so much to Rosemary. Thanks to all of you for this sacred time outside of time together. I feel so full and so held as well by Rosemary and all of you. So thanks so much for sharing this time. Um, May you go forth and appreciate your own moments of aliveness and deep presence in this next week. And next time, we'll be joined by January Gill O'Neill. So take good care of yourselves, everyone. Take good care of yourself as well, Rosemary.
Thanks, James. You
And
too.
yeah, see you all again soon. Thank you very much. Bye.